Welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. Uh, there's been so much talk about the Department of Education nationally. The fact that Project 2025 has said they want to get rid of the Department of Education. Many Republicans have, and now the Trump administration has. While they've gutted the number of people who work at the Department of Education, they're also moving legislative efforts to get rid of the department as well. And as we know, if you cut funding for public education, you're going to have fewer teachers, bigger class sizes, and of course, worse outcomes for kids. In addition to probably a shift to our property taxes of paying to make up for these cuts. So you're going to lose services and pay more locally just so that Donald Trump and Elon Musk can get a big tax cut. Well, today we have a great guest, Randi Weingarten, who's the head of the American Federation of Teachers. She's going to be talking about education and all things that people need to know about that. But before we begin our conversation with her, here's our one question with Sean Carroll, the president and CEO of ANERA, who's doing great humanitarian work in the Middle East and across the globe. Yeah. So the question is, this is not reality, but then again, Washington isn't always reality anyway. If you had the ability to change one law at the federal level that you think would do the most good that you'd like to see happen, what would that one law be?
Campaign finance.
That's come up before. Tell me more why.
Look, I think it's the biggest stain on our democracy right now. Our democracy is I hope, still strong. I'm very worried, as many people are, but it's stood the test of time. There are a lot of mechanisms, checks and balances, the institutions. If those all hold, they're strong. But the money in politics is making it hard. It's making it hard. There are too many special interests that get their way by funding campaigns, and there's too much dark money, and there's too much money. And for me, it would be campaign finance reform. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, you're not the first, and I'm guessing you won't be the last to say that. But as someone who in the state legislature used to introduce bills to have 100% public financing of campaigns, I certainly see it here. When you have 15,000 lobbyists, not saying anything wrong with being someone who provides information, but if you have 15,000 lobbyists and 10% of them, for example, are big pharma alone, you can imagine why we pay more for prescription drugs than any other country. And when you look at the campaign financing and why people take positions that may run counter to the positions of their constituents, that usually becomes the issue.
Yeah, and I think people know it. I think people are angry because they know that the moneyed interests are the ones that get paid attention to, and that means the vast majority of Americans are cut out. And they may think that people are speaking and acting on their behalf, but we're not really seeing it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being with us, Sean.
Thank you.
Appreciate it
very much.
Welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Congressman Mark Bocan from Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District, and we have a very special guest to talk about something that is so very important to literally everyone in this country, public education. It's the great equalizer. We need to make sure if everyone's going to have a chance and opportunity in society, they have to be able to get a good public education, and we put our tax dollars to that for a reason. Unfortunately, we've seen many attacks on public education, especially under Donald Trump and the Republicans in Congress. Most recently, with the tax bill, in order to get $4.5 trillion from the middle class and those aspiring to be in the middle class to the wealthiest, to the Elon Musk and Donald Trumps of the world, they've proposed a 45% cut to education, the jurisdiction for the Education Committee. That plus trying to put money into private schools over public schools, that plus going after the way that people get financial aid for higher education and other issues are all part of the conversation today. And I can think of no one I would rather have to talk about all these subjects with than my friend, Randi Weingarten. She is the president of the 1.8 million member American Federation of Teachers. They represent teachers, paraprofessionals, school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses and other healthcare professionals, local state government employees, and early childhood educators. She was a president of the United Federation of Teachers, the AFT Local 2, prior to becoming the national president in New York City. She led efforts under Donald Trump with Betsy DeVos. Randi, we probably have a few stories there, but that was some interesting times. But you were amazing in the fight then, just as you're amazing in the fight now. You were a teacher of history at the Clara Barton High School in Brooklyn's Crown Heights neighborhood back in the 90s. It's an honor to have you with us today. Please welcome Randi Weingarten. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Congressman. And I mean, this is, I hope it is not a state secret. I am still on leave from my teaching position
Mhm.
in Clara Barton High School because I had these aspirations to go back one day. And I'm actually going to teach in the other union we represent in New York City in the professional staff Congress in the CUNY system
Oh, great.
because I really, really miss teaching. So I try every year or two to do a class. I did one at Cornell a couple of years ago. I try to do a class so that I'm reconnecting with with teaching, which I love to do. But
Yeah.
thank you for everything. I know we're gonna dive in, but I this is my opportunity to also say to you, thank you for everything. You have been out there over and over and over again. And, you know, from if there's a story about never giving up, it's all the people who, when Scott Walker became
Mm.
governor and just basically sliced and diced
Yeah.
everything that was there as a support for people that have opportunity and dignity. And I remember meeting you then and
Yes.
in that fight, and you are such a warrior for justice. So I just really wanted to say thank you.
Just if I can connect something on that story, after that happened, Scott Walker's attack on public teachers and other public employees, we had about a 70% cut of people applying to the School of Education to
Right.
be teachers after that disrespect. The good news is we're back to that pre Scott Walker level again.
Right.
So people want to be a part of helping people have their best lives. And so, anyway, that's
Exactly.
a success story. But, Randy, if you could just start, tell listeners about AFT. Who are you exactly? What are your priorities? What do you do?
Sure. So, we are one of the bigger unions in America. We started in 1916 in Chicago, by the way, and one of our first members, the first local was Local One in Chicago. We basically run as, we're now 1.8 million people, but we run by locals, and we really believe in local autonomy. So we have locals scattered all around the country, locals that are involved in education, school districts, locals in higher education, locals in hospitals. Like, we represent Planned Parenthood in Wisconsin, by the way. That's
That's
one of
great.
our locals. Locals in public services. We actually represent the correction workers in Montana as well as correction workers in New York State. So, but what the through line is that everybody that we represent makes a difference in somebody else's life.
Mhm.
So whether it's kids, you know, Head Start kids or older kids, kids who are going to college, graduate workers, nurses. We are now the second largest nurse union in the United States. Doctors. We represent people who make a difference in the lives of others. We used to call ourselves a union of professionals, and our bus drivers
Yeah.
and our paraprofessionals and support personnel and correction workers and others said, "Wait a second, I don't see myself in that word." So what we and I wish they had, but when they didn't, we said, "Okay, let's change it because we want to make sure that the membership sees themselves in the work that we do." So we have actually we now basically say AFT, education, healthcare, public services,
Good.
and representing the people who really work for and care for other people. And so when I started with Local 1, so my local is Local 2. New York City is Local 2. Local 1 was the first local, and one of our first leaders, I was about to say, was also a suffragist
Oh,
and really fought, as did so many, to try to get rights for women. And one of the other stories that's lore in our union is that we were the only union to actually bring an amicus brief in Brown versus Board of Education, and we actually expelled our segregated locals in the 1950s.
oh,
So the issue of um, diversity equity, inclusion, the sense that ensuring that we see each other and we champion and accept each other
Mhm.
is not just what we do for a living, it's what we live.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. And I know our AFT local here in my district, it's strong, and
Mhm.
you've always had great people fighting on behalf of
Right.
all the people that you represent. So let's,
And we love those tech schools that
yes.
local represents. I'm trying to grow, career tech ed in public schools throughout the country, particularly in high schools.
Yeah, and we don't have a Scott Walker right now to destroy things. We have a person who used to be the head of schools in Wisconsin. Tony Evers is our
Yeah.
governor, so we're much better off. So let's talk about things in different buckets, because I think there's three buckets I'd like to try to talk about things.
Mhm.
One, I got some questions around K to 12 education. Then let's go to higher education, and then let's just talk about labor overall, if that's all right, because
That'd be
when you're,
fantastic.
yeah, the co-chairs of the labor caucus, this is obviously very near and dear to my heart, and that's why I love talking about this. So I think let's start with this newest attack,
Mhm.
because we've seen multiple attacks over the years on public education, but the newest attack being within the reconciliation bill, which again is just a fancy way of saying getting around the 60 vote filibuster. They're trying to set up cuts to fund a $4.5 trillion theft from the middle class and those aspiring to be in the middle class to the wealthiest. And in doing so, they're even talking about eliminating the Department of Education. So let's actually start with that, the Department of Education, because you've been so outspoken in,
Mhm.
the devastating losses to the employees in the Department of Education. Where did this idea come from to get rid of the Department of Education?
So this whole notion of getting rid of the Federal Department of Education actually started before the Department of Education started. It started because it's a assault on opportunity.
Mhm.
So it's actually started because the same people, heritage, who are doing it now, did it politically. First it was a political issue that Carter did the Department of Education because my sister union, the NEA, wanted it. Frankly, my union, um, the AFT, the Al Shanker actually wanted it to stay, the department, in HEW, little known fact, health, education, and welfare, because he thought it was important to have families surrounding kids
Okay.
and didn't want it to be isolated. So Carter started it. NEA really thought it was important for a lot of good reasons. And since that point, because it was Carter who started it, the Republicans were against it, even though the Republican president, George Bush, really truly, actually expanded federal oversight of education more than any other president ever did. So the hypocrisy here is
Yes.
crazy. But this is the reason they hate it so much. Uh, After Brown versus Board of Education, when the Supreme Court said education must be that separate is not equal, there was a real push federally, starting with Johnson in particular, to say, what does that mean? How do you actually make that so? And all of these funding formulas that we now know so well, like the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, like Title I, like, you know, English language learners, like Career Tech Ed Perkins, like Pell, all this language that you and I kind of talk about
Yeah.
at Code. All these things started in the 1960s as a way of saying, if you really want to create opportunity for all, that means that if kids are poor, you're not going to get more money from property taxes from a rural district
Right.
or from a poor urban district. So we can't keep saying you're stuck. Let's make sure the federal government gives us some funding so we can level the playing field.
Mhm.
That's what Title I was. So They hate it because they don't want to spend money on other people's children.
Yeah.
And that's what it means. And if you and but what's so unbelievably um the biggest hypocrisy here is that who are the big winners in terms of all these funding formulas?
Mhm.
The red states.
Yeah.
The red states actually get more money, and what happens with this money, the funding formulas that I'm talking about, what happens is they go basically right to districts and go basically right to schools.
Mhm.
The state education department, this is why the right wing and frankly, some state superintendents and some governors want it so badly. They want block grants so they can use this same money for whatever they want to use it for,
Yeah.
including vouchers as opposed to using it for kids. So they think about the Department of Education basically what they basically do is give money out and make sure that is actually spent on the kids it's intended for. So
Right.
summer school, after school, that's what Title I goes for. Title I also goes for everybody who talks about the NAEP scores or the scores. It goes for those reading specialists or those math specialists who are actually helping kids who have fallen behind in literacy. It's Head Start.
Yeah.
It goes for kids who are first generation college goers and whose parents can't afford college, so they get scholarship. It goes for the welding programs or the cyber programs in schools because most of the time, schools can't afford to put a clean room in or this kind of equipment. It goes for kids with disabilities so that they have a paraprofessional in the room. Say you have a motor disability and so you have someone who's in the room with you who is helping you with motor skills.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why March 4th, 2,000 places around the country, we were out there saying, don't take money like this. Don't rob Peter or Peter's kids
Yeah.
to pay for Elon's tax cuts.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what this fight is. But the department is kind of like the symbol of this fight because that's the place where this money gets distributed. Could you imagine if it was distributed somewhere else, like Robert Kennedy was distributing
Right.
this?
Right.
Come on.
Yeah. Well, and they know they can't directly eliminate it, that they need Congress to do some action, and they've got
Right.
people working on that. But they've done a lot of damage to it
But
via the
that's
employees.
but that
Mhm.
but that's one of the things, Representative Pocan, that's one of the things I'm really worried about in reconciliation because when you say, "Oh, take a big bucket away from
Yeah.
here," even though the new, and this goes to what I anticipate is your next question. Even when Linda McMahon says, "Oh, no, 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 we are not touching
Yeah.
these formulas." How do you get that level of cut out
Right.
the Department of Education if you don't touch the $100 billion of formula funding?
Yeah.
So who knows, like at the very end when they say, "Oh, we need $4.5 trillion." Oh, we'll throw in this $100 billion. Who cares that
Yeah.
50 million kids are gonna be affected by that? Who cares about that kid with disabilities in Dane County, Wisconsin?
Mhm.
Who cares about that stuff? I mean, that's how out of touch these folks are. But to your next question of when you cut half the Department of Education 5 days into your job,
Right.
that means it's a budget cutting exercise. It's not an exercise of efficiency. I'm all for efficiency, but this is evisceration, not efficiency.
Well, and to those cuts, and I agree because every time I try to bring any conversation back, they're flooding the zone with lots of things that we could comment on, lots of shiny objects. But at the end of the day, their holy grail is passing a tax cut for Elon Musk and Donald Trump and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and
Right.
anyone who could belong to Mar-a-Lago. But in education, they're cutting $330 billion is the targeted cut for the committee that deals with this. That's 45% of all the funding, and you started talking about some of the funding, Title I, IDA funding, nutrition. Can you just talk a little more so people can understand what those cuts are that they're actually proposing?
Sure. So the most important thing to your listeners that I can say is that the Federal Department of Education, it's about opportunity for all.
Mhm.
It doesn't run schools. It basically fills opportunity gaps. That's what it basically does. So schools, I mean, we just talked about Governor Evers. He ran schools when he was the superintendent in
Right.
Wisconsin. And the local school board runs schools, not
Mm.
the federal government.
Right.
So what it means is there's, a few buckets within the Department of Education. And to take $330 billion, it's it's the entire funding formulas that go directly to kids. That's $100 billion. So what does it mean? 26 million kids get what I call Title One, which is these resources for poor kids. And that in schools that goes for all sorts of supplemental services that help academically or help nurture well-being. So it could be guidance counselors, it could be social workers, it could be, as I say, lowering class size, after school, summer school, computers. It could be the reading specialist or the literacy or the math specialist. So all of those things, any of that, 26 million kids, that's what Title One goes for. 7.5 million kids get what we call the Individuals with Disability in Education Act.
Mhm.
That is any kid who has what is called a 504. Any parent who's listening to this who has a kid with disabilities understands what a 504 is and an IEP is.
Yep.
They're gone. They would be gone. They would be nothing if we don't have the federal money, because the federal money is the way we create a contract with a parent and a school district, and to make sure that that individual child gets these kind of resources and gets them every single day. The third, English language. We want everybody to learn English. 5.5 million kids get what is called the English as a second language or English language acquisition funding.
Mhm.
10 million kids, rural schools all over the country. 10 million kids who whose school districts are in places where the tax, that the wealth of a county or the wealth of a town can't afford a full, quality education. So rural kids get funding to make up for the tax base. Um, Career Tech Ed, Perkins money, that goes for kids who want to take, and I'm a big believer that we really need to make high school. College prep is really important, but we gotta do career prep too. So we've gotta do more of this, not less of this. But it's really hard. You wanna put up a construction lab, you wanna put up a plumbing lab, you wanna put up any of these things. It takes a lot of money to actually create that in a school. That's what Perkins money goes for. And so I talked about Pell before, but Head Start. Head Start goes for helping. We know when kids get language acquisition, when they socialize with each other, when they were 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, that's when your mind is the most supple.
Mhm.
And Head Start money. So when I'm talking about this money, and then there's one other big, big bucket, think about everything I just said. It's specific to individual kids. Parents see it, know it, feel it. So I've said to our members, go to your school board.
Yeah.
Actually ask them what money is going to be lost, what services are going to be lost if you lose this money, because it is basically one out of every $9 spent in education gets spent on this stuff. This stuff is not, this stuff is stuff that is actually needed. It's core to the education system. Those are all that what the department does. The second thing it does is it helps kids and young adults who are going to college. So I talked about Pell, but think about this. Every parent who does a financial aid application for their kids, it goes through the Department of Education. Instead of you doing 10 different applications to 10 different colleges, It's one-stop shopping.
Yeah.
So half that department was canned.
Mhm.
How if you have a question, who's gonna answer it? And then the 45 million people who get student aid, they get I'm sorry, they basically have borrowed money to go to college.
Yeah.
All of those programs are now frozen. We actually filed a lawsuit to unfreeze it today. They're all
Good. Good.
frozen.
Yeah.
So what are we gonna do? We're gonna put every one of those people into foreclosure because they can't get the programs that they were in on driven replacement or on public service loan forgiveness. They're all frozen.
Yeah.
No one of those 45 million people, you don't know what to pay every month. You don't know what's going on every month. You don't know if what you pay is actually getting credited to your loan. It's as if they want to put into jeopardy everyone who goes to college.
I was on Tom Hartman's show today. Someone called in. They have loans going back to the 80s. They were on their final payment and the system went down and they're
Yeah,
not sure what's going to happen on this right now. Um,
exactly.
so is it
So
fair?
that's why we sued them. We sued them to
Yeah.
say,
Good.
you can't do this.
Yeah.
You can't do this to people. You cannot break a system that DeVos broke it. Then
Yeah.
Biden tried to repair it. He did a pretty good job. And then they broke it again
Yeah.
for millions and millions of people.
Well, and isn't it fair to say, because most of education is funded at the local level, largely the property tax,
Right.
if you put this pressure on local school districts, in some cases, that may mean an increase in property taxes to make up for some of this loss. So not only are you losing the service as someone who's a working person in the United States, but also you're going to be taxed more at the local level to fund the tax breaks for Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Exactly. So think about for a lot of people, a lot of places, a lot of this money actually goes for after school activities for kids.
Mhm.
So it's a triple whammy. You're a working parent, you lose the service.
Yep.
In order to get the service back, it's going to be an increase of local taxes. So
Yeah.
Trump and Musk are going to get a tax break. You're going to get a tax increase if you keep the service. And if you don't keep the service, what about childcare? Because a lot of this is after school and wraparound services. So it is a triple whammy for a lot of working parents. And their ledger domain right now, they say one thing when they actually mean another.
Yeah.
You can't have Linda McMahon keep saying, "Oh, don't worry about it," when we know in reconciliation, there's a target of $330 billion. And remember what I just said about all the funding formulas? It's $100 billion. Where are they going to find this $330 billion? Where are they going to find it?
And that's why, this is just Wisconsin, common sense. We have the smell test. It doesn't pass the smell test. If you're a Republican lawmaker who's afraid to have a town hall right now, you should be, if this is something you're proud of, you should want to get on the rooftop and scream it, right? Instead, they're hiding in their basements. And then we have to go into their districts and do town halls because we have to let people know what the consequences are. You started talking about higher education a little bit. Pell is another area. I was one of those folks that I grew up in a lower middle class family. I received Pell grants. I want to make sure other people who are smart enough and capable enough can get a higher education, but that's likely also on the chopping block, right?
It's this Pell is on the chopping block. They've frozen all of the student loan, all of the student loan formulas, student debt formulas. They've frozen, or they fired virtually all the people who were doing, financial aid oversight or troubleshooting. So if you think about all of that together,
Mhm.
you could throw out Pell. You've broken the student loan system,
Mhm.
and you have basically um, dismantled the financial aid system. What that essentially saying is, and one more,
Mhm.
and then it's not just the OCR, and it's not just the investigations of all these colleges. Let's put that aside, but it's basically saying that they're cutting so many of the research grants
Yeah.
that these colleges and universities do, and they're cutting it in a really slimy way, meaning that if you're doing research in a lab, there's a lot of upfront costs to do that.
Mhm.
You gotta have a real lab, you gotta actually have people who work in the lab. So, basically, many of these grants, like 40 or 50% of the grants go to creating those lab circumstances.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, no, we're cutting that. You only get 7% for that or 10% for that." So, the places where they haven't fully cut, even the cancer research that gets done, take Johns Hopkins, take Columbia Presbyterian, take, I'm sure, University of Wisconsin.
Mhm.
You're just taking the jugular out. So, all of this is basically, no, stop the research in colleges, stop poor kids from being able to go to colleges, stop people who have student debt from being able to service it. It is a huge assault on the future.
Yeah.
So get rid of the Department of Education and get rid of every one of these vehicles that create opportunity for people who are not rich to actually go to college and to stay in college. It's an assault on the future of America. And I think that's part of the reason why people, they may not know what the Department of Education does, but in poll after poll after poll, we were like, no,
Yeah.
something
Why would
like
you get rid of
that.
it? Yeah.
Why are you getting rid of that?
Yeah.
And because people get in their heart what you cannot have a future of a country. No country has a future without educating its children and its young people. And this is really taking a wrecking ball, not only to pre-K 12, but to higher education.
And beyond these 45% of cuts, the $330 billion you mentioned, they also are trying to push more private school vouchers as a
Mhm.
separate policy. And that also takes money away from our public schools and sends it most of the time to people who already are attending a private school. So it's really a tax issue for rich people rather than an
Right.
education funding issue. Can you talk just about vouchers a little bit?
Yes. So look, vouchers have been around for a very, very long time. And, there and let me say this. Let me preface this by saying my wife is a rabbi.
Mm.
I'm not a religious Jew, but I believe in my faith and I actually try to go to Shabbos services as many Friday nights as I can. I I I understand, why this country is so religious and believes in religion. And there are two things that we have in terms of religion. One is free exercise, and the other is no establishment religion. And because of those two clauses side by side,
Mhm.
our country actually is more religious than almost any other democracy in the world.
Yeah.
And in some ways, people's credit it because it doesn't have a state religion.
Mhm.
And in this context, let's talk about vouchers. Because the initial reason for vouchers were, people who wanted their kids to go to parochial schools or others said, look, we need we need the help to have that. And what school systems throughout America did instead, because of these two clauses, to say no, it's separate, was, public schools paid for transportation, paid for tutoring, we paid for a bunch of other things to try to lessen the burden.
Mhm.
And for decades, that's how things kind of operated. A few years ago, people said, there's really, really terrible public schools. And Milwaukee was one of those places.
Yes. Yeah.
I would disagree that they were that terrible, but
Mhm.
so why don't we actually give parents a voucher so that they can have a choice? And what we found out, and still today found out, is guess what? It's the school's choice, not the parent's choice.
Yeah.
And what we saw in those early voucher programs, which were used to try to say to people, particularly, African American parents, this is a way out, was that ultimately the kids that went to the voucher schools did worse than in public schools.
Right.
So
Right.
so all of a sudden that didn't become the issue. Then it became let's actually help deconstruct the public school system.
Mhm.
And that's the era that we're in right now. That's what you're seeing in Florida. That's what you're seeing in Arizona. So, and in every single time this issue goes to the public as a plebiscite, whether it was Michigan in the 1990s, whether it was Arizona a few years ago, whether it was just Kentucky, Colorado, and Nebraska in 2024, it's voted down because people basically say, you want to go to a private school? Okay, go to a private school, you pay for it.
Yeah.
You want to, but we need public funding in public schools. But in those places that have started it, it is a very much a real push by billionaires. It's no longer a push to get kids out of to get black, minority kids out of public school to go to vouchers. It's now a push by billionaires. And
Yeah.
basically, it's a push to defund the public schools, to fragment the public school system, and what's the results in the places that we have it, like Arizona or in Florida?
Mhm.
Public schools have been defunded, and basically 70% of the people who get the voucher money have already sent their kids to private schools. And
That's
and
you argue that's about education, right? Clearly, that's about redistribution of wealth upward.
exactly. And all those schools that are lifted up as your kid could go to this school. This is why I say it's the school's choice, not the parent's choice. What has happened in the schools that people say, oh, your kid could go to this private school? The private school raises their tuition, so the voucher never covers it. So so this is just the data. It has basically defunded public schools. It creates a lot of fragmentation, and basically, it's a redistribution of wealth where the rich basically get the voucher.
Yeah, and the failure rate of these schools that just vanish after all this
Huge.
public money has gone into them, and the fact that if you're a kid with special needs, they're likely not gonna want that child, so you're leaving,
No.
certain kids in public schools and not others. There's just a lot of problems
The
with it in general.
the irony is the same people who have said, "Oh, we need accountability of public schools," are allergic to accountability from the voucher schools.
Exactly.
So in some ways, we don't even have the data anymore. That's why I keep
Yeah.
saying this is the school's choice. And when you ask the public, if you only had one choice about strengthening public schools versus having private and public choice, if you only could do one or the other, by literally 70 to 80
Yeah.
to 20 to 30, parents across the nation say, "No, strengthen don't keep the status quo, strengthen those public schools."
Yeah. So one last subject is just labor in general. I think we're at an all-time high in the last 5 decades at least of public opinion on public unions or unions in general. I'm sorry, not just public unions, unions in general, because they're giving that person ability to have a say in their workplace, to talk about their safety conditions, their working conditions, their pay and benefits. Um, what's you've been so outspoken on behalf of working people in all unions, and thank you. I'm a 3 decade plus member of the International Painters and Allied Trades. But tell me about what you see right now for labor and what you see as some next steps for the movement.
So, I am, I don't wear rose-colored glasses, but I am an optimistic and a hopeful person. And I have watched us struggle through the, how you create agency for regular folks. There are literally 3 ways of creating agency and power for people who are not born with a silver spoon in their mouths. And part of what's going on right now in America is that regular working folk were sold a bill of goods so that basically the powerful can become more powerful.
Yeah.
The rich can become more rich. And it's not that regular folks don't want to be rich. People want to be people want to make sure that their kids have a better life than they do.
Yes.
And I don't begrudge anybody who's rich, but don't tell me that you deserve, you know, tax cuts when Tesla never paid, corporate taxes last year,
Yeah.
and other people can't get to a $15 minimum wage. So the power of education,
Mhm.
the power of having a labor union so that collectively you can negotiate with your boss for decent conditions, for for less arbitrary treatment,
Mhm.
for decent wages, so that you're not one illness away from bankruptcy, or that when you
Right.
retire, if you can retire at 65 or 70, you have a pension.
Mhm.
This is what a labor union does. And I think what's happened is that, just like with the culture wars, somebody, smear, 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 smear gets thrown at people. Yes. Should we strengthen public schools? Yes, of course we should strengthen them, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the same in terms of the labor movement. We're not perfect, but there's nothing else but a union
Mhm.
that actually helps individuals get a better life,
Yeah.
get more kind of consistency and fairness in a workplace, and have a better, compensation and better wages to be able to fend for himself or herself and their families. And I think what's happened is that people see it now. They
Mhm.
see the agency, they see the power, and they see with a union you can actually fend for yourself. And, and so the difference is the third one is voting,
Mhm.
because you need policy. What you do in the labor caucus, what you do in Congress, you're fighting for policy for people to have a better life. And that's what unions do,
Yep.
both in terms of the political space, but more importantly, the economic space. You create community, you create agency, you create a sense of empowerment and engagement, but all for the purpose of having a better life for yourself and your family.
Yep. Randy, thank you so much for being available today and sharing on some of these topics that are the most relevant topics right now in the federal government. If people want to follow you or follow AFT, what are what information do you have to share for folks?
Okay, so I'm still on Twitter, but it's a swamp.
Yep.
So I am,
Me too.
I actually do my own skeets on Blue Sky.
Mhm.
Every now and then, like pretty much like one or two a day on Twitter, but I actually follow me on Blue Sky at Randi Weingarten or R Weingarten. Follow AFT Union on Blue Sky. We have AFT.org where we put a lot of stuff out there, education stuff, action stuff, things like that. But most importantly, really, truly, most importantly, if just thank a worker or thank a teacher. They are working really hard to try and make sure that kids are in a welcoming and safe environment, even with all of this craziness. And we need the public's help.
Yeah. No, thank you. I tell you, you're one of the most identifiable people in the labor movement, fighting on behalf of workers in all areas, not just in the jurisdiction of AFT. And I think people really, hopefully, are inspired at the end of this program today and ready to fight. So, thanks so much for being with us today, Randy.
Thank you.